Thank you.
When all of us come here from different parts of the country, I think we run out of battery even before we begin. Now, there are a lot of big talkers, and we can't have that. So can you give me a nice mic that works? Thank you. I think there's no, there is no battery. It's run out of battery. Just get a new one. Okay, I'll just take that.
No, I should just give it to you. We just had it.
Well, we may as well begin. Oh, help is at hand, literally. Thank you very much. There you go.
Hello, hello, hello.
Well, all of us come from different parts of the country. We speak different languages. We pray to different gods. We eat different cuisines. But something brings us together, makes us aware of our Indianness, so to speak. Is it the flag? Is it the anthem? Is it the national song? Is it the icons that we've all revered? At least 150 years ago, some of these brought us together, united us against our colonial oppressors, the British. Today they're not here, but there are many other oppressors. Poverty, illiteracy, communalism, censorship. Will some of these symbols of our nationalism unite us against some of these evils, even the pollutants in the air we breathe, especially here in the capital? That's really the subject of this debate. Nationhood without nationalism. Our national symbols. Is it possible? Because we're in a time when a lot of these symbols are being thrust upon us. It's not just under this government. It's been over the last 10 or 12 years we've been increasingly made aware, sometimes on the back of the writ of the courts. And I want to begin this discussion with Mr. Dasgupta. Will these symbols be enough to unite us, Mr. Dasgupta, against these forces, these real enemies that we're faced with?
Well, thank you, Rahul. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this. I do realize that the point of view I have is a little unfashionable for literary festivals who tend to be a little post-national in their orientation, and quite understandably so, because it's the nature of their interest which defines them. So for a lot of people, the word nationalism is very much something which is archaic to the 21st century. It's something which they see as the privilege of the 19th century and at best the first half of the 20th century. And a lot of people believe that nationalism, while being relevant to India till about 15th of August or at best 26th of January 1950, is now something which we should enshrine, put into a glass case, polish it once in a while, and leave it aside, because we've now entered a post-national cosmopolitan world. Now, the issue of nationalism being only against something, which is really how you posited it, that it's against pollution, it's against those who oppose us in cricket, that it's against some other imaginary foe, I think is taking a very narrow and maybe too much of a television discussion-centric view of the whole world. There is something which is slightly more positive about nationalism, And and I don't necessarily want to put it in the sense of my country right or wrong, but every country has its own identification with nationalism. Some can be particularly virulent, as we saw in the case of German nationalism in the previous century at some time. But Indian nationalism has not been like that. I think more than anything else, today, for example, a lot of the newspapers had the preamble to the Indian Constitution. It was a little quirky because some of those words didn't exist on that, and Mr. Subramaniam is there, he'll understand what I'm talking about, that some of those words didn't exist in 1949 when the thing was signed. And those who say, look, Indian nationalism means the Indian Constitution, they're right up to a point. But does it mean that there was no Indian nationalism preceding the Indian Constitution? Does it mean there was no sense of nationhood preceding the Indian Constitution? Certainly, I don't believe that was the case. Had that been the case, we wouldn't really have got a national movement. We wouldn't have had a sense of Indianness. We wouldn't have had various invocations of what constitutes India, perhaps in a very hazy way. So, a lot of people talk about the idea of India, in the singular, the idea of India. Now, to my mind, that's preposterous, because your idea of India is very different from his idea of India, and perhaps from my idea of India. And there are times when I have an idea of India, which is that located in Bengal, and there is another time when someone may have it located in Tamil Nadu. Or Mr. Owaisi certainly has an idea of India, which is uniquely his, located in Hyderabad. Now, I don't necessarily have to share everybody's idea of India, but I'll be happy if they have an idea of India, and there's a commitment. One of the worst things which I found in latest is when you encounter some Pakistanis, particularly members of the Pakistani elite, which you encounter whenever you travel to London or other places. Because you will find, I said, what passport do you hold? Oh, we have 2 passports. In other words, you always have that little safety valve. You don't really care much about your country. When something goes a little wrong, you can always flee to your second passport. This has also been a problem which has plagued something like Afghanistan. That the primary principal commitment to the country is eroded, sometimes in the way of cosmopolitanism. And this is what's happening in the European Union. You had these grandiose visions of one Europe. You trying to battle against history. You said we've overlooked, we are now having a battle against history of everything that stood in the 20th century. We want to create a new 21st century, a European idea which does not look behind us, but looks ahead. And you see the example. So, the whole essence of it is that we have idea of India, we have ideas of India, we have commitments to India, which are sometimes very, very different. To sometimes say, therefore, that this is the right version of India, and this must be excluded. And I say this because all sides tend to do this exclusionary. And the liberals perhaps are even more guilty than the others. Because they tend to think everything else which doesn't correspond to their sense of enlightenment is not acceptable. They believe that rationalism dictates everything. But most of India hasn't been dictated by rationalism. Most of India the ethos of India has often been dictated by faith. And anti-enlightenment is also as respectable a tradition in Europe as it is in India. But we only look at it very partially. So I think the most important thing when we come and discuss nationalism is to not look at the whole issue through a Western prism. Because they have evolved in one way, and I'm not questioning how they have evolved. Some of it may be positive, some of it may be not so. We have evolved in our own way. And we are still evolving. And I believe that these forces of nationalism, far from being eroded, are actually being strengthened.
Well, let's not pretend here that we don't have a unique association with the state. All of us do, of course. But the fact is, and I want to come in there because you said that imagined problems, imagined realities, etc. These are not. Poverty is not imagined. Neither is censorship. Increasingly, we're seeing the state extract from us their pound of flesh if we are critical of it. And we've seen these debates, whether it's JNU in the past, etc., etc. But I don't want to hog the floor. Mr. Pavan Varma?
No, I must at least partially agree with Swapan Dasgupta because technically I am in the NDA. I agree with him that nationalism is a positive, primary, emotional, visceral, powerful, relevant, topical issue. But it requires a strange type of magic, a strange effort of alchemy to convert something that is so positive, which unites all of us together, into something that can become something that divides. Now it requires magic. And either you have that magic wand or not, because what is happening is today that some people are roaming around the country with a metaphorical syringe in their hands. And every time that they can, they want to take a sample of your blood to see how much nationalism do you have. And the problem in this is, I'm reminded, if you will allow, of a couplet of Shakil Badayuni. मेरा अज़्म इतना बुलंद है कि पराए शोलों का डर नहीं. My commitment is so strong कि पराए शोलों का डर नहीं. मुझे खौफ आतिशे गुल से है. Gul is flower, it could be rose, it could be lotus. मुझे खौफ आतिशे गुल से है कि कहीं चमन न जला दे. So now the point is that in us, we are bound together by nationalism, and I agree with him that it preceded 1947. I'm doing a major book on Adi Shankaracharya. 1200 years ago, this great man, Hinduism's greatest thinkers, set up 4 mutts. One in the south, Shringeri, one in Dwarka, one in Puri, one in Joshimath. North, south, east, west, that was India. That Indian civilizational ethos was the bedrock of the nationalist movement. Because we are a civilization before we became a nation. Now, how can you doubt the fact that this emotion binds us all? People of many diversities, of many religions, of many subcultures are bound together by an overarching yearning of Indianness. And who are you to give me a certificate of what I am to be a nationalist? And here come three important questions, and I'll take just 1 minute. First of all, nationalism cannot become a means by which you deflect attention from real issues. In other words, you are not getting a job, farmers are committing suicide, advise them both to say Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Now it doesn't work. It doesn't work because nationalism or ultra-nationalism, which is its more ugly form, cannot become a means to deflect attention from real issues. And when it is done, I tell you one thing, Janta sab samajhti hai. People understand what is happening. Secondly, it cannot become a means to stifle my inherent right guaranteed under the Constitution to disagree with you and to have dissent. It's guaranteed under the Constitution, and if I disagree with you, or if I hold a different opinion, if the answer to you is to say that somewhere in that syringe, my nationalism is lacking in the number of values it should have, and therefore I am anti-national, In other words, I am capable of being proceeded against for sedition. Sedition. In this country, this is a country of शास्त्रार्थ. यहाँ तो सब कुछ ही संवाद के बेसिस पे हुआ है, डायलॉग होता है, डिबेट होता है, डिसएग्रीमेंट होता है. How can you use nationalism to stifle dissent and debate? And the last point is, there is a new virus of competitive nationalism. Which means this, that suppose a municipality in Jaipur says, every morning when we come, we will sing the national song, national anthem. I say, give the fullest respect that you can to the national anthem, to the national song, to the national flag, and those who don't are violative of both the law and everything that we value as civilizationally important. But if the Jaipur municipality says, sing the national anthem in the morning, national song in the afternoon, then another municipality will say, every time you clear a file, please stand up and all of us will say together, Jai Hind. Or if you clear a proposal, then we must all meet at lunchtime and collectively say, Bharat Mata ki Jai. I mean, how do you reduce something so sublime and something that binds us together to such superficial trivialism? That is the question that we have to answer today as a mature civilization and a strong democracy.
Well, there are some questions that I had on these particular issues because, as Mr. Dasgupta said, look, let's not arbitrate or at least arbiter a sense of nationalism through a Western perspective. But I think where he sort of comes in, he says that let's at least arbitrate it through a constitutionalism perspective, which is where we should actually be focusing this debate. Dr. Singhvi, you're qualified. Governments, not just the NDA, and let's be very clear about this, have been very squeamish about people impinging on what many people believe is really the sanctity of our national symbols. We have seen people being arrested, etc. In the West, in fact, in many countries. Those are freedoms that are protected and guaranteed, aren't they? Are we taking this a bit too far?
Thank you, Rahul. Let me start by saying that I couldn't agree more with Pavan Varma, almost everything he said, and tells you why the organizers get the seating plan so wrong frequently. You know, one of the words which Swapan mentioned was not in the constitution, was added, was the word secularism. And also socialism. But possibly, I'm guessing Swapan meant that therefore secularism, how can it be now a basic structure of the constitution? Well, Rajiv Bhargav, a professor at Harvard, gave a very interesting definition of secularism. And he linked it to the Lincolnian term of the people, by the people, for the people. And he said we can understand why for the people means, we can understand what by the people means. Why did he have this phrase of the people? And he then answered his own question by saying, he said of the people to convey a sense of co-parcellary ownership, co-ownership of India to each and every nook and cranny of each and every Indian. Now that sense of ownership is precisely what you have to endeavor in everything, whether you call it nationalism, anti-national debates, sedition debates, or secularism debates. And I don't think Rahul is right. He's trying to be fair as an anchor. I don't think prior to 2014 we found this great filial demonstrations of nationalism which we are having post-2014.
No, well, criticism certainly, sir. Well, I mean, you stood up in court and argued against
we have
Rahul,
we have
the
Rahul,
IT Act.
We have Rahul for the last 50 years, a Insults to National Emblem Act. If we get up and burn the flag, if we go and abuse the national anthem, there's a statutory, parliamentary statute. But what we are having post-2014, and I certainly don't want to make it sound political, but these are harsh facts which we cannot camouflage in the rhetoric.
Arrested, sir.
You see, today...
Cartoons were drawn.
Of course.
Which portrayed people
yes, but there
who
were two
represented the state.
I agree. Two things. One, I don't think that the frequency was even fractionally as much. Two, I don't think it had state Nelsonian blind support or active support or otherwise passive support. Three, I think today there is a positive feeling of encouragement. Now, you see, these are very disparate things which are linked together. A Dayal Singh College, Vande Mataram, will have the debate exhausting itself not on whether you can upgrade college facilities, improve educational facilities, but will have a debate on the renaming. And that will be linked to, as Arun Shori said yesterday, not whether you have a cow and you're looking after the cow, but my allegation that you had a cow. Now, this is reducing something to the comic situation were it not for the tragic consequences. I think it is vital to realize that at one level, the topic, the theme which you introduced, nationhood without nationalism, at one level you cannot have nationhood without nationalism. Because nationalism, the most convenient definition I find is a sense of shared identity, cultural, linguistic, historical, legacies, etc. In a general sense, like an elephant, we all know how we define an Indian without quite being able to define it. We can't define it, but we understand. To that extent, certainly, there should be no nationhood without nationalism. But nationalism has never meant what it has come to mean now. It has really come to mean well beyond the refuge quotation about patriotism of the scoundrel, the refuge of the scoundrel. It has come to mean bizarre happenings in our country, which certainly India is not used to. And I would oppose a Hindu India as much as I would oppose Mr. Owaisi if he suggested a Muslim country. These are the ethos which we have to deal with. And I think the important thing is to realize that to try and wear your nationalism on your sleeve, to make daily demonstrations of the syringe, as Pavan said, is something which is the beginning of the end. It's a disease which catches up, it has a snowballing effect, and I think it's going to be impossible to contain this Frankenstein monster, howsoever you camouflage it in big words or in rhetoric.
Mr. Owaisi, is it more so now, this tendency, or has it been around? Let's be honest here. Let's not be partisan.
No, I am not at all surprised by what Mr. Swapan Dasgupta just said about seeing today's advertisement about the preamble of the Constitution. I'm not surprised because, unfortunately, Swapan Dasgupta belongs to, or he is very close to an ideology whose ideology is based on what Golwalkar said. And Golwalkar's patron saint was Shri Shri Adolf Hitler. And what is Indian nationalism and what is Hindutva nationalism? This is what we have to understand. The Indian nationalism which I espouse, which I stand for, is for peaceful coexistence and accommodative diversity. Now, I take the point of Swapan Dasgupta when he mentioned about today's advertisement. Fraternity. This is what Ambedkar wanted, bhaichara. We have to understand that Indian nationalism is based on social democracy. Without that, we cannot achieve either political or economic democracy. Without biradari, without fraternity, what is Indian nationalism and what is Hindutva nationalism has to be understood. The Indian nationalism is inclusive. The Hindutva nationalism is exclusive. The Indian nationalism believes in composite culture. The Golwalkar and Shri Shri Adolf Hitler nationalism believes in supremacy of one religion. It does not believe in composite culture. And may I also end by saying about this whole issue of standing up in theaters when national anthem is played. Is it because to receive divine benediction in the theater that I stand up? And then if, let me also remind Swapan Dasgupta that on 29th of August 1947, in the then Calcutta, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi did not stood up when the national song was played. Soharwardi stood up. Mahatma Gandhi sat because he said, this is Western custom, it is not part of Indian culture. Would you have prosecuted Mahatma Gandhi today? This is what has to be understood, the Indian nationalism and the Hindutva nationalism. Children die because of a lack of oxygen, nationalism zindabad. Where is an end to it? Farmers are committing suicide, no, zindabad. So this has to be understood. There's a difference between the Indian nationalism and the Hindutva nationalism. And without fraternity, you cannot, and without social democracy, we cannot achieve other things.
Why even prosecute, Mr. Gopal Subramaniam? Why even prosecute? There are democracies, some would say evolved democracies. I don't want to stand in judgment of their politics or their robustness of their constitutional legacy, etc. But there are many countries where you can burn the national flag and those freedoms are protected. Can you explain a little bit from a constitutional perspective?
I think there are 3 points which need to be noted. The first is the historicity of any country and its evolution, which Swapan Dasgupta mentioned, can never be disputed as students of history. Obviously, prior to the coming of any constitution, you have a history. The history, as well as the bonds by which you come together to gain freedom, are completely matters of fact. Then we come to the second position, which Pavan spoke about, is what exactly does any constitution, for that matter of fact, guarantee? And I wish to make a comment there, that what is the relationship between an individual and the state is the most critical thing which is determined by the Constitution. The state is a facilitator of your freedom. It's not meant to be a negator of your freedom. Secondly, it is not meant to be your moral judge either. You have your own points of view, you have your own interests, you have your own intellectual ability, and you have the capacity of discernment. None of this is actually meant to be interfered with by any external agency, which is the state. But the greatest danger is when state actually becomes a bit of society itself. So it dons a twin role. It's both state and it also exercises a strange kind of societal pressure. I think all this is forbidden by the Constitution. Unless and until we understand in a completely objective and somewhat religiously neutral sense, secular sense, and that's what is meant by secularism, apart from pluralism and coexistence, is a measure of religious neutrality of the state and the society to enable all beings, all fellow citizens, to be able to discover their identity. The pursuit of identity, I think, is the most important goal. Now, obviously, in any environmental or contextual setting, you're going to be beset with social problems. You have democracies where they take extreme positions. You have democracies where if you even run in the nude, it is not meant to be an offense. It is perfectly acceptable. And it is considered to be a part of a fundamental guarantee under the European Charter. Now, cultural settings may be different, but the most significant part is ours is the only constitution which has a fusion of both American liberalism, because a part of it was influenced by some of the American Constitution, but more importantly, the French, the continental ideas of liberty and separation of powers. So we must understand that we are meant to live and breathe free, fresh, clear air, even if it is contaminated air, but intellectually it must be one which has no brother, forget a big brother, even a small brother looking over your shoulder. There must be complete entitlement to the castle which is your home.
But a counter to you, not really, just a follow-up, but the courts actually did uphold, and now they are trying to sort of revise their position on this business of standing up before a movie begins in a cinema hall. So we have a situation where the Supreme Court set down, I believe, to be quite ridiculous guidelines, where you have to stand up when you're not even thinking, or you're there to get entertained, because you have an edict that has been passed really by the courts. Now, explain that, because you've just told us how the Constitution guarantees and is underwritten by the concept of liberty.
Well, I'll be absolutely upfront. Entertainment is a completely different context. If you were to frankly ask me, that's hardly the place where you stand up. And that's hardly the place where you sing the anthem. I would disagree.
So why are we being forced then? And Mr. Dasgupta, the government of the day is sticking to its guns on this particular issue.
That's a very interesting question. I mean, I have my own personal views, but I think it's important to find out, when did this practice start? Practice started in 1965. It was Indira Gandhi, who was then Minister of Information and Broadcasting, who actually introduced this practice. It didn't exist before that. That is not to say that patriotism didn't exist prior to 1965. Just as the inclusion of the word secularism did not necessarily imply that secularism did not exist prior to 1976. I think you'll find that I don't quite agree with Mr. Subramaniam when he says entertainment and national songs are separate. I think all of you who watched iconic football games or soccer games as they are called in some parts, in the West would notice that they start always with the national anthem, which is sung very robustly. And even those who had the good fortune of attending the last night at the proms would recognize that if you're a fan of classical music, you might find the last night of the proms is always followed by a lusty singing of Rule Britannia. So it's not that it's unknown. And it's not that this is something which is uniquely an Indian quirk which is somehow brought it. Now, I think the problem arises when you make it into a fetish.
That's right.
I personally believe that there's no real need to sing the national anthem when you go to watch Padmavati, for example.
When you get to watch it, that is.
I did say that. When you get to watch Padmavati, and if you so choose to watch it.
That's not a matter of choice anymore. Let me tell you that.
Oh, it's obligatory to watch it, is it?
I think you're not going to give that option. We're not going to see it.
Oh, I think you've decided what it's going to be. Anyway, the point is we are not talking Padmavati, which is an interesting subject to do with mythology and history and people's readings of it. But I think, let's not get into it.
But in a sense, Padmavati is also very, very closely related to a sense of
that is precisely the point.
If I want to sing the entire 3 verses of Vande Mataram, which in many gatherings which I attend, which others may not attend, is habitually done, I don't think I should be prosecuted, nor should I be called an obscurantist.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
So I think we should have that flexibility, we should have that respect, and most important, I think, we should not get into this position of disdain for either the national song or the national anthem. If these basic attitudes are maintained, I think we can manage.
I don't think that's the subject of debate. He just wants to come in on that particular point, because we are talking about enforced fetishes.
Yeah,
He's just talking about a fetish.
Of course, I think I just saw a remarkable consensus, and I haven't heard Pavan on it, but I think he'll agree, that perhaps the national anthem certainly should not be enforced as a singing job. And the reason I think which we are missing is that it is here enforced by a judicial edict. And that's where the problem starts. You gave an example about, and this is a little technical but it's important, about being able to burn the flag in some countries. He gave the example of being able to run nude. Those are countries where the law permits it. Now we have an established system of doing these things. The problem arises when we short circuit and leapfrog over that system. The system is simple. You first make a law to that effect, or at least a delegated law to that effect through Parliament. For example, insults to flag is a law of parliament. You then have the option on the citizenry to challenge that law as violating his rights. And if the challenge doesn't succeed, that law remains the law. And then you have this kind of a side intrusion by the courts where they say that we are giving you legislation in the interstices of an unoccupied field, which is not occupied. So you don't have a law, and the law is supposed to be passed by the deeming fiction of your representatives, which gives it legitimacy, gives it popular mandate, which is why you accept it. But today the problem is that these enforcements of fealty and loyalty are happening by rules as you go along. I make the rules as I go along. I do it either as a mob frenzy or by the diktat of a municipality mayor or by the diktat of a state chief minister. I don't resort to law, which otherwise gives me the power to challenge that law and test its constitutional validity.
Well, the problem is if you try to challenge it, you're branded an anti-national. That's where the problem begins from. Mr. Varma.
No, I think that it was perhaps inadvertent that Swapan mentioned Padmavati. No, advertent. So in that case, you would deserve a rebuttal. The point is very simple. They are not exactly the same subject, and certainly not. But there is a similarity in methodology. What is the similarity? Within the rule of law and within the rights given to you under the Constitution in a democracy, you have the right to protest. You have the right to say, I don't agree with what is being shown. And you have the option not to see it if you are overruled. But in a democracy, you don't have the right to say that I will behead you or pay 10 crores for someone to behead you. Or, what a beautiful face, I'll cut off the nose of Deepika Padukone. I mean, why? That is precisely when the pursuit of a particular self-created and simulated ideal begins to overarch the normal restraint and reticence of constitutional democracies. And that is the common link. That is the common link between what I mean by the imposition of ultranationalism and the methodologies being used for Padmavati. The situations.
So national anthem is ultranationalism.
So I would say,
nationalism is ultranationalism.
Actually, the problem is that right in the beginning, I said that we need to show the highest respect as under the law to the national anthem, the national song, the national flag. But advertently, you said that when it becomes a fetish, that is precisely where the danger lies, because by doing so, by the sheer process of overemphasis, when it's not required, you are devaluing that very sentiment. This is the point. So everything that happens, again to say that as Ghalib said, हर एक बात पे कहते हो तुम के तू क्या है? हर एक बात पे कहते हो तुम के तू क्या है? तुम ही कहो ये अंदाज़े गुफ्तगू क्या है? How do you talk? How do you debate? How do you have a dialogue to everything now? A question is posed questioning your credentials. Your credentials as an Indian, as a citizen, and of course with it, your nationalistic fervor. So that is what I'm against.
How would you like to respond to that, Mr. Dasgupta, if at all?
Look, I think Dr. Singhvi was very right. When did this controversy start? It started because of a silly judgment. A silly court judgment. And I use the word consciously. And it started, and it was a contrived controversy. The point is, it's not whether we celebrated it. It was not initiated by it. The point is very simply this, that once something is declared obligatory, no one is going to say, no, we think this is a manifestation of ultranationalism. We are not going to do it. Everyone will say. So what happens is that what should have been a debate on common sense, flexibility, pragmatism, became something to do with law. And it became part of the statutes, it became part of the National Dishonor Act, etc., etc. So the way in which it got approached, the way it got done, and after that politics inevitably comes in. You think if the government had said, no, we oppose this, the opposition would have sat quietly? It would have? Yes, it would have. The opposition would have sat. Just like the opposition would have emulated what it said about beef in the streets of Kerala. Would it have done that? The point is, competitive politics invariably comes in, and it's sad that competitive politics has come in. It is sad that in various parts of a particular city in what is now Telangana, they don't sing the national song, which is Vande Mataram. Why? Our entire national movement was dictated by that ethos of Vande Mataram. And even now Vande Mataram is used not as a song, but more as a catchy slogan, a catchy point of identity of India. So I think we need to ask these questions. It's not a simple answer, but I think the worst thing is if all these complexities are reduced to just one law, one court judgment. Have that flexibility, have that pragmatism. Govern India by common sense.
Are we trying to say that the centre takes a position? One second, sir. Are we trying to suggest here that the centre is taking a position in court on what you've described as a silly judgment because they're scared of what the opposition is going to say about them?
I think part of it is quite true.
You really think so?
I think part of it is quite true, because if someone says it's a good idea to sing, for example, if tomorrow someone says that the national anthem should actually begin with the movie screening should begin with the national anthem, and it concludes with the national song. No.
हो गया है जयपुर
ये भी हो सकता है. Now, to my mind, that's a really...
But I disagree with you on this point. I don't think they're very sensitive about the opposition is saying, because the court has actually passed a ruling in reference to a movie called S. Durga, where one of the high courts has said, look, let's screen this film, but the government of the day is not budging. And the opposition is at their throat on this particular issue.
Sorry, I don't know.
So, well, it's fundamental. It's about a movie that was ejected from a film festival. It says so much about...
S. Durga.
Yes.
Sexy Durga.
Well, it's been... the name's been changed.
For a bong, that's a bit... Never mind.
You've had a CBFC that has passed this movie. Look, as I'm trying to suggest... No. All I'm trying to suggest here, Mr. Dasgupta, is that when an institution certifies...
When I am not contesting the right of a filmmaker to make a film.
You're contesting the
right
of a
filmmaker to approve it. I am not even contesting the right of the CBFC to approve it for certification. But don't ask for aesthetic approval of everything that's passed by the CBFC.
Do you approve of the overruling of the judiciary, of the CBFC?
There is a problem there.
Of the jury?
There is a small problem there. Yes. Of course, that name was changed. The S was abbreviated to an S from inception. You know, on a matter of principle, this is very dangerous repercussions. Where do you stop? You have created a statutory body called the CBFC. It has a reviewing board, which is XYZ. 3 people sit. It has an appellate board. It has about 25 guidelines primary, it has about 100 guidelines subsidiary. Now, right or wrong, you get it approved through that. That's not final. If you think the approval is wrong, any one of us can go to a high court and say, let's quash this approval. That's wrongly given.
Yes.
That's no problem. That's the whole point of proceeding according to law. Because no law, no country permits obscenity or hurting religious sentiments. The problem is that everybody takes the law into their own hands. The law today, if you accept it, is, for Padmavati with that example.
No, Dr. Singhvi, I don't think that is the problem.
No, half a second. Just Padmavati example is, everybody in this audience, or at least 50% of these people, will have 50% views about Padmavati. One wants the nose cut off, one wants the beheading, one wants the 10 crore, one wants some other thing. So there are 20,000 CBFCs. And this applied across the board to every creative expression will lead to chaos. That is why it has to be nipped in the bud. You have to have a ladder, a discipline of a judicial ladder.
Dr. Singhvi, if I may say so, I think the real problem was touched upon by Mr. Gopal Subramaniam when he spoke about, look, the Indian Constitution, there is a problem of does the state acquire the identity of the individual, or protector of the individual, or does it act as a guarantor of society? And I think this is a fundamental issue which in India we have not yet come to a satisfactory conclusion. Western political thought would say the individual is the supreme. By and large, if you look at Indian political thought, and by no means exclusively Indian political thought, you would say that attachment should be given to the views of the community and that the community must prevail in a lot of ways, and that it is the sense of what constitutes common decencies which should be the thing. So therefore, the brief to the CBFC, it's not merely a question of process, it's a question of what are they looking for? Are they looking for individual expressions of good aesthetics or something? Or are they looking for something which does not violently offend, and I use the word violently offend, community sentiments? Let us come to a conclusion as to what should be this. As long as this confusion prevails in India as to whether we are for the community or are we to look at the individual as supreme, we are going to get it. I believe that to have the individual as supreme in India minus any concern of society is going to be a very, very dangerous trend, and that is not an endorsement of any form of Surpanakha behavior or any behavior which says, you know, cut off someone's thing, issue a fatwa in someone's name, etc.
It is an
intellectual debate. Recognize it as an intellectual debate. Don't lower it to the level of either a law and order debate or leave it to the judges. These are political, societal questions. These are not judicial questions.
Just one question to you.
One moment, Pavan. I think what is important is the level of ascription which you give to the liberties of an individual. Even if we were to make some allowance insofar as the interests of community, social welfare is concerned, I think there must be preponderance for the liberty of the individual. In the name of the welfare of the community or social interest, it must never be a subterfuge. What worries me is when you use words, and these are very emotive words, when we talk of nationalism, well, I mean, everybody is not a Gelner who thinks of it as an act of modernity.
Right.
Everyone doesn't think of it in terms of modern sociology. But the issue is, somewhere nationalism, patriotism, being a member of a united society, all merge together. But the net result of this fusion could be something which is completely unintended. Therefore, I'm saying that it is very necessary for whichever government it be of the day. It hardly matters. What matters is that their understanding of constitutional values, their role under the Constitution to give a substantive primacy to individuals. And now I'm coming to a footnote, which is a very important footnote, because here we are, a very elite audience who are talking about this subject. But if you were to treat the rich, the poor, the people belonging to the depressed classes all at par, then the ascriptive identity for the individual, I think, is a very important connotation.
I'd just like to ask a question. One question. No, just before you ask a question. You see, in this balance between the individual and the community, which you rightly spelled out, every country has its own tradition. Who defines what the community is thinking? You set up a jury. You choose that jury carefully, and that jury is mandated as per your norms to take a decision on whether a film needs to be cleared or not. But then over and above the jury, The Ministry of Information and Broadcasting decides unilaterally what it considers to be what the community is thinking.
That's a political choice.
So now, therefore, I say to you, the moment you compromise the freedoms and the liberties and the strength of the individual in a democracy by bringing in the notion of community, it may be valid, but it is always a dangerous backdoor entry because someone is interpreting what the community thinks, and that person is telling you, I know, and you don't.
I would like to hear what Mr. Owaisi has to say on this, because I think we confronted a very similar and a touchy issue during the Danish cartoons issue, which I'm sure a lot of you remember. Now, there were people in the West who said, this is a question of individual creative rights, and therefore we must print it. Now, nobody in India, I'm very glad to say, printed those. Why? There were a lot of people who said we should print it, etc. Why? Because it was also, to begin with, a gratuitous insult. Secondly, it was known to have created some sort of problems it would have resulted in. So there was a conscious suppression of individual freedom for the larger good.
Rushdie writing the satanic verses was not a gratuitous insult either.
This is a very careful balance which we have to always look at. If you look at the CBFC charter by which that Cinematographic Act, you'll see one of the basic points which they have is the unity and integrity of the nation. Now Pavan throws up his hand, but someone might equally say, what good God, this sort of fictitious film about some Khalji ruler is going to disrupt the unity and integrity of the country. Certainly it's going to
Surely we are
I'm not suggesting that's the plea they
Swapan,
take.
that has to be said by...
You have to be predisposed.
We have to be mindful
I think you're
of
missing the
larger
point.
interest.
You are absolutely right. If that is the guideline, that has to come from the CBFC first, from the appellate board second, and the court. The problem is you and I are deciding what is the unity and integrity of the country. That's a 1.25 billion people deciding that.
Already ruled.
You see, Dr. Singhvi, I don't believe that the unity or any political issues can be decided by the courts. You do, for vested interests. I do not believe they can be settled. But I would like to hear, because this is a very touchy issue.
Well, when we gave politicians the power, we got Pakistan. So be careful. When we gave politicians the power, we got Pakistan. Be careful. Okay. Very quickly, there was a question referred to you on community sentiments.
Yeah, let me remind all of you that whatever is happening in our great nation is only because of the roadmap given by the Honorable Prime Minister. Why I say that? The very first speech the Honorable Prime Minister made in the Lok Sabha. Have we ever heard a Prime Minister of India saying, 1200 साल की गुलामी के बाद हमको सत्ता मिली है? What is that? 1200 साल की गुलामी के बाद.
No, it's a statement of fact.
Thank you for accepting it. Why? Because as far as an Indian I am concerned, for me it is 200 साल की गुलामी, which you are not part of. For you were in power at that time. Now listen to me. Now, Swapan, have the patience, because I didn't interrupt you. See, this is intolerance.
Okay.
This is Hindutva nationalism.
No, Chief Dick, please, let's keep this about board.
Now,
thank you, please.
The point Dr. Singhvi made, I think so it has not synced in your heart. That is, make a law. You do not want to make the law. You want to allow the hounds to shout at everyone. You make the law. As far as the cartoons is concerned, Swapan, I am not a practicing lawyer as these eminent jurists who are here. But the little law, 295, 153, that law is there. You finish that law, who's stopping you? Take that law away. The law is there and the law has to be implemented. Thirdly, you say about Telangana, I am not against national song. I am against you telling me that this is the test of my nationalism, which I will not accept it. Which I will never accept it. And you have no right whatsoever to test my nationalism or my loyalty. May I ask you, are you interested in fundamental duties or fundamental rights? You have 1 lakh patients of dengue. You have lakhs of farmers who are dying. But you are not concerned about right to life. You are only concerned about CBFC. You're only concerned about what has to be done. Please understand, the Constitution talks about fundamental rights, then the duties come. This is my answer to you. I hope it satisfies you.
Well, I'm under pressure to wrap up this debate. Excuse me, please. No, we've really run out of time. In fact, we've overstretched our allotted slot. I'm not going to take questions from the audience, unfortunately. We just don't have time. I'm terribly, terribly sorry. I'm not the censor board, but I've run out of time, and I'm only going by the laws that govern this lit fest. So I am the rules. I'm terribly sorry, sir. I'm terribly sorry, but I can't make an exception because please, gentlemen, please. If I ask you, sir, there will be 50 people who will ask questions. I can't make an exception, sir. Please, we need to wrap this up. I'm terribly sorry. Time's up. The last word hasn't been said, and I'm sure we are going to have other occasions when we will all interact. Please, sir. Please, sir. Please. Going to leave it at this, please. Thank you. I'm terribly sorry.